All right, welcome to this explainer where we are diving headfirst into one of history's absolute greatest and honestly most chilling unsolved mysteries. Today, we're going to unpack a cold case that has completely baffled experts, scientists, and investigators for more than 60 years now. It's a crazy story of survival, of the unknown, and of a frozen mountain that just stubbornly refuses to give up its secrets.
So just put yourself in this scenario for a second, okay? Imagine you're camping, high up in the snow-covered Ural Mountains. It's pitch black out, it's freezing, the wind is just howling outside your shelter. Then suddenly, in the dead of the night, you become so inexplicably terrified that you don't even bother using the door. You literally slash your tent open from the inside and run out into the deadly cold. I mean, we are talking about temperatures dropping below negative 25 degrees Celsius. You have no coats, you have no boots, you grab absolutely no supplies. You just run.
And here's the crazy part. Days later, rescuers would find these bodies hundreds of meters away from that slashed tent, and the condition of the victims? It was shocking. Some had shattered ribs. One had a fractured skull. Another victim was actually missing a tongue. I mean, the sheer panic required to drive people out into the snow like that, coupled with these bizarre injuries, begs the ultimate question, what on earth actually happened that night? Well, today we're going to break down the evidence to see if we can uncover the truth.
Okay, let's jump right into part one, the expedition and what happened before the mystery.
So, the expedition began completely normally. There were no bad omens, no signs of panic, just a group of friends setting off on an adventure. The year was 1959. It was late January, and 9 hikers from the Soviet Union set out on this really challenging skiing expedition. They were led by a 23-year-old named Igor Dayatlow. Now, it is super important to understand that these were not beginners, they weren't just weekend warriors. They were highly skilled, considered absolute experts in their field, and their goal was incredibly ambitious: to cross one of Russia's most dangerous and unforgiving mountain ranges.
Looking at the timeline, initially, everything was totally routine. Because they'd survived extreme winter trips before, they were super comfortable, laughing, taking photos of the beautiful landscape, keeping up with their diaries right up until they vanished. Nothing, and I mean nothing, suggested this trip was any different from their previous successes. But then, they missed their scheduled return. The silence dragged on, and soon enough, massive search and rescue teams had to be deployed out into the harsh wilderness.
Which brings us to part 2, the horrifying discovery and the anomalies in the snow.
When the search teams finally get to the tent, it's still standing, right? But the fabric had been violently cut open from the inside. The hikers had deliberately escaped through the ripped walls instead of just untying the entrance. But the detail that truly haunts investigators is the footprints. The tracks leading away into the deep snow showed that most of the group was fleeing barefoot or wearing only socks. Again, these were experts. They knew for a fact that abandoning a perfectly good shelter without gear in those temperatures meant certain death.
The recovery process was just grim. It painted a heartbreaking picture of their final hours. The first bodies were discovered beneath this huge cedar tree where they had desperately tried to light a tiny fire. High above them, the branches were broken, meaning someone had actually climbed the tree in the pitch-black darkness, probably to spot the tent before they froze to death. Between that tree and the tent, 3 more hikers were found scattered, frozen in poses that suggested they were desperately crawling back to camp. And it actually took months for the snow to melt enough to find the remaining bodies buried deep in a ravine.
Now, here's where things get completely wild. When the autopsies were finally performed, the forensic evidence was entirely contradictory. Several victims had massive internal chest injuries. One suffered severe head trauma. Yet, incredibly, there were absolutely no external wounds. I'm talking no bruises, no cuts, no scrapes on the skin above those shattered bones. Medical examiners said it was almost as if they'd been crushed by an enormous, invisible force. It's like being in a high-speed car crash, but out in the middle of a snowy wilderness without a single mark on your skin.
And if that wasn't weird enough, we have to talk about a detail that seems straight out of a sci-fi movie. Investigators found inexplicable traces of radioactive contamination on some of the victims' clothes. I mean, why would a group of young hikers out for a ski trip in a remote mountain range have radioactive material on their garments? This single detail completely blew the investigation wide open.
So how do we make sense of this? Let's look at part 3, decades of theories and seeking an explanation.
If we use a bit of deductive elimination here, you can see that every single major theory hits a massive roadblock that contradicts the forensic data we just talked about. First, the avalanche theory. Some scientists argue a small avalanche forced them to flee, but critics have long pointed out the slope simply wasn't steep enough to trigger a classic avalanche. Second, the military experiment theory. Given the radiation, a lot of people suspect secret Soviet weapons testing terrified the group, but no official evidence has ever been declassified to confirm this. What about a wild animal? Well, there were 0 animal tracks and absolutely no bite marks on the bodies. Finally, the paranormal theories, UFOs or unknown mountain creatures. While they're super popular in online forums, there is just no credible evidence to support them.
But there is this one fascinating scientific theory that attempts to explain the sudden panic: infrasound. Basically, infrasound is a strange wind phenomenon created by the topography of the mountains. It generates these low-frequency sound waves that humans can't necessarily hear but can feel. And these waves are scientifically proven to trigger intense panic, dread, and disorientation in humans. This theory suggests that pure, sudden fear, induced entirely by invisible sound waves, drove them out of the tent. It's a really compelling idea, though honestly, it remains unproven and still doesn't fully explain the crushed bones.
Let's move on to part 4, modern investigations and how science is stepping in today.
Fast forward to right now. This case was never truly closed in the minds of the public, so modern researchers are using highly advanced computer simulations and modern snow science to revisit the whole thing. And this modern analysis points to a specific phenomenon called a delayed slab avalanche. This happens when a solid block of snow breaks loose hours after the snowpack is disturbed, in this case, disturbed by the hikers digging out a spot for their tent. Researchers theorize that a heavy slab of snow slid down in the pitch black, crashing onto the tent and just creating absolute deadly confusion. It's definitely the best scientific model we have right now. But wait, it still fails to explain the crushed ribs or that inexplicable radiation found on the clothing.
And that brings us to part 5, the unsolved verdict.
This case endures in our collective memory for one specific reason. As one writer perfectly put it, perhaps it's frightening because nature itself can become deadly in ways humans don't fully understand. That really hits the nail on the head. The true terror of the Dyatlov Pass isn't about sensational ideas of ghosts or monsters. It's the stark realization that nature possesses a brutal, chaotic, and deadly power that we as humans simply cannot fully comprehend or control.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. When you look at all the pieces, the slashed tent, the missing boots, the crushed ribs, the traces of radiation, what do you think actually happened on that freezing night? Was it a bizarre, delayed avalanche, a covered-up military experiment, or was it something we still fundamentally just don't understand? Thank you so much for exploring this mystery with me.